The wind howled across the dry plains like a warning that night, rattling the loose boards of Caleb Turner's old chicken coop as he finished his chores under a sky heavy with stars, each one sharp and distant, like they had no interest in the struggles of men below. He had lived alone on that land for years, long enough for silence to feel like a second skin, long enough to forget what laughter sounded like when it wasn't, just an echo in his own head. And yet something about that night felt different, like the land itself was holding its breath. And as he stepped toward the coop to latch it for the night, he heard it, a faint sound, not quite the cluck of a chicken, not the rustle of straw either, but something fragile, something human, something wrong. And his hand froze on the wooden latch as his eyes narrowed, every instinct telling him to be cautious because out here, trouble often came wearing the face of the helpless. Still, he pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking like they were reluctant to reveal what lay inside. And there, huddled in the far corner among scattered feathers and straw, was a girl, thin as a shadow, her clothes torn and dirt-streaked, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if she could hold her breaking body together through sheer will alone, her eyes wide and terrified, reflecting the lantern light like those of a cornered animal. And for a moment Caleb just stood there, unable to reconcile what he was seeing with the harsh, predictable rhythm of his life, because nothing like this ever happened here, not on his land, not in his lonely world. "Easy," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse, and the girl flinched so violently that it cut through him deeper than any blade, as if even the sound of a man speaking was something she had learned to fear. And he set the lantern down slowly, raising his hands a little, not in surrender but in reassurance, his instincts shifting from suspicion to something older, something buried deep, a need to protect, to shield, to help. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he added, softer this time. And though she didn't speak, didn't move, didn't trust him, not yet, something in her eyes flickered, like a dying ember catching just enough air to glow again. And that was all it took for him to step forward, slow and careful, offering his coat, which hung heavy with the scent of leather and dust and long days under the sun. And she hesitated before reaching out, her fingers trembling as they brushed the fabric, like she couldn't quite believe it was real, like warmth itself had become something unfamiliar. And when she pulled it around her shoulders, her entire body seemed to sag under the weight of it, as if the simple act of being covered had finally given her permission to feel how exhausted she truly was. He crouched a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her, studying her carefully now, the hollow cheeks, the bruises half hidden beneath grime, the way she winced even when she shifted slightly, and anger rose in him slow and steady, because someone had done this to her. Someone had let her get to this point, and out here, where survival depended on grit and decency, that kind of cruelty had no excuse. "What's your name?" he asked, and for a long moment there was only the sound of the wind outside, until finally, barely louder than a whisper, she answered, "Eliza." And it felt like a fragile thread being extended toward him, one he knew better than to pull too hard. "Eliza," he repeated, nodding once, grounding the moment, making it real. "I'm Caleb." And he stood then, offering a hand, not to grab, not to force, just to give her the choice, and she stared at it like it was the most dangerous thing in the world, her breath shallow, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. But whatever she saw there, it wasn't what she had come to expect from men, because slowly, painfully, she reached out and placed her hand in his, and it was so light, so fragile, he felt like holding it too tightly might break her. He led her to the house, each step cautious, the distance short but heavy with unspoken fears. And once inside, he set her by the fire, stoking it until the flames rose bright and warm, casting golden light over her pale, drawn face, and he brought water first. Then food, simple things, bread and stew, but to her, it might as well have been a feast. Because the way she looked at it, the way her hands hovered before finally taking it, spoke of hunger that went far beyond a missed meal or two, and she ate like someone who had learned not to. Trust that there would be more later, quick but careful, as if afraid it might be taken away. He didn't ask questions then, didn't press her for answers, because he knew enough about pain to understand that it didn't loosen its grip just because someone demanded it to, so he let the silence sit between them, not empty this time, but full of warmth, of safety, of something new taking root. Days passed and Eliza stayed, at first because she had nowhere else to go, and later because leaving stopped feeling like the only option. And little by little she began to change, the fear in her eyes softening, her movements less guarded, her voice no longer trembling every time she spoke, though the shadows never fully disappeared, and Caleb never expected them to, because some wounds didn't fade, they just became part of who you were. He learned her story in pieces, never all at once, how she had been taken in by people who promised shelter but delivered cruelty instead, how she had run, how she had hidden, how she had nearly given up before, finding the Coop that night, and every word tightened something in his chest, a mix of fury and helplessness, because he couldn't change what had been done. But he could make sure nothing like that ever happened to her again. And somewhere in those quiet days, in the shared meals and the small, careful conversations, something else began to grow, not out of desperation or pity, but out of something steadier, something stronger, built on trust that had been hard-won and easily broken, yet somehow holding. It happened one evening as the sun dipped low, painting the land in shades of gold and amber, when Eliza stood in the doorway, watching him work, her expression thoughtful, almost distant, and he glanced up, wiping his hands on his shirt. "You all right?" he asked, and she nodded, stepping closer, her fingers twisting together in a nervous habit he had come to recognize, and for a moment it seemed like she might not say anything at all, like the words were caught somewhere between her heart and her lips. But then she looked at him, really looked at him, and asked, "Why did you help me?" And it was such a simple question, yet it carried the weight of everything she had been through, every reason she had learned not to trust kindness, and he considered it carefully before answering, because she deserved honesty, not something easy or comforting but empty. "Because you needed it," he said finally, his voice steady, "and because no one should be left like that." And she studied him as if trying to find the flaw in his answer, the hidden motive. But there was none, just a man who had seen someone hurting and chose to do something about it. And something in her seemed to settle then, like a decision had been made deep inside her. It was later that night, under a sky just as full of stars as the one that had brought her to him, that Caleb found her sitting on the porch, wrapped in his coat again, though she had clothes of her own now, and he joined her without a word, the silence between them, comfortable in a way that would have been unthinkable before. And after a while she spoke, her voice soft but certain. "I don't have anywhere else," she said, not as a question, not as a plea, just as a fact. And he nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying as much as what she was, and he took a breath, the words forming in his mind before he could second-guess them. Because sometimes the truth didn't need polishing, it just needed saying. "Then stay," he said, turning to her, his gaze steady. "Stay. Be my wife." And the words hung in the air between them, bold and simple and heavier than anything he had ever said before, and her eyes widened, not in fear this time, but in something closer to disbelief, like she couldn't quite understand how she had gone, from hiding in a coop to being offered a place, a life, a future, and for a long moment she said nothing, her silence stretching out until he wondered if he had gone too far, if he had asked for something she wasn't ready to give. But then she reached out, her hand finding his, not trembling this time, not hesitant, just sure, and she nodded once, a small motion that carried more meaning than any speech ever could. Their story didn't end there, of course, because real stories never do. They just keep going, through hard days and good ones, through moments of doubt,
and moments of quiet joy. But what mattered was that it had begun, not in a grand gesture or a perfect moment, but in a broken place, with two people who had every reason not to trust and yet chose to try anyway. And if you've made it this far, if this story moved you even a little, don't forget to follow the journey, because sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can change everything. And there are many more stories like this waiting to be told.